Hello, everyone. Welcome to Park Launch webinar. We are here today for a very timely discussion to converse about Pakistan's economic challenges and how could tech play a role to sort of transform Pakistan's economic trajectory if it could do so. And if so, what are the, sort of consider some policy interventions to enable that growth? I will start off with briefly introducing the panel, starting with myself. My name is Kashon Lisa. I work as Policy Advocacy Lead at Pasha. Previously, I was working as policy specialist with the government of Pakistan on matters of national security. I was also a visiting fellow with the Stimson Center in Washington, D.C. We are also joined by Asif Peer Saab. So good to have you here, sir. And we're just going on with the introductions right now. And I'm also joined by a stellar panel today. And of course, starting off with Miftah Saab, who is Pakistan's Foreign Minister of Finance. His previous stints include the Federal Advisor on Finance, Revenue and Economic Affairs, Chairman of Pakistan Board of Investment, and an economist with the IMF. These days, he's most famously known as the person who saved Pakistan from the default. Moving on to Asif Peer Saab, who is CEO, member of board, and the managing director of Systems Limited, which is one of the largest tech exporters in Pakistan. Not to mention that he's a very recognized and respectable industry leader in the sector. We also have Safia Gori Ahmed joining us from Washington, D.C. She is the Regional Director, South Asia at McClarty Associates and has previously served on the staff of Senate Foreign Relations Committee in the State Department as an advisor on Pakistan and Afghanistan under Secretary Clinton and Secretary Kerry. Thank you all for joining in. Just a note for our viewers and listeners that please feel free to drop in your questions in the chat box and I'll get to them at the end of the interactive session. So, I'll dive right into the discussion. And of course, Miftah Saab, I'll start off with you. Pakistan, always the tough questions, always go to you. But I think Pakistan is and in fact has gone through serious economic crisis, and Pakistan was on the verge of a default, and you had to take some difficult decisions. With that as the backdrop and looking forward, to reduce economic dependence on financial institutions and on the friendly countries, of course, what does Pakistan need to sustain economically? In retrospect, I think I would ask, what are the right decisions that the country still need to take? Over to you, sir. You are on mute. You have to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Kashun. Thank you for a very kind and generous introduction. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, who've joined in to listen to our conversation. And thank you, Safia and Asif, for giving me a chance to interact with all of you. Again, in Pakistan, the issue is a boom and bust cycle. Every time we have growth of more than 4%, we run out of foreign exchange, and then we have to slow down the economy. And then when we run out of foreign exchange, we have to go to the lender of last resort, also known as the IMF. And so as long as you're going to the lender of last resort, that's like going to an emergency room in a hospital. We're never going to be healthy. We're never going to grow and prosper as a nation if the management of our economy is that 2 years out of IMF, 3 years inside the IMF, then again 2 years out of the IMF. And I think the question was leading to the answer that if we were to export enough, and we would have, if we had growth based on our exports rather than our imports, then perhaps we would not run into a foreign exchange crisis. And that's essentially the crux of the matter. When Pervez Musharraf took over in 1999 in the martial law, Pakistan at that point was exporting 16% of its GDP. So 16% of our total national production we were exporting. By the time Pervez Musharraf left, that had gone down to 12% of GDP. So it was a secular decline over the years. And if you remember that there was a time where the government had kept the dollar at 60 rupees, then People's Party came, all of a sudden dollar went to 80 rupees, which was a 33% devaluation. And then in 5 years of People's Party, I'll have to give you credit, and you'll have to give them credit that export as a percent of GDP went up slightly from 12% to 13.5%. Then when PMLN came again, it was 13.5% and it went down to 8.5%. In 5 years, the country kept the dollar at 105, but nonetheless, until I came in the last 5 months and then I changed it, but otherwise you kept the dollar at 105, but exports secularly declined as a percentage of GDP and it went down again. Then even now it is 8.5, 9% of GDP. And this is something that we need to change. If your imports are 20% of your GDP and exports are 9% of GDP, you don't want to make import cheaper. So you have to make difficult decisions, which includes actually giving the real cost. Let's say if you're importing fuel, petrol or diesel, then you have to charge people the real cost of petrol and diesel, and you can't subsidize this. Which is what was happening at the time I took over. Similarly, you can't really be obsessed about making imports cheaper. When we talk about, bringing down the cost of the dollar, nobody actually consumes dollar directly. You don't eat a dollar, right? You buy stuff from dollars. So if you make dollars cheaper, what happens is that you make imported goods cheaper. Now, if your imports are $80 billion, which was Pakistan's import last year, and your exports are only $31 billion, which means that for every dollar of exports, you have $200.60 of imports. Your priority should not be actually to make imports cheaper. Your priority should be to make export easier, which is to say, incentivize exports and at least have real market value, of the dollar, and not come up with artificial values, and so this has been a policy paradigm fault in Pakistan, that we've not gone with the market prices. We've come up with our own prices, and there are many structural reasons why our exports don't increase, and we have to address those structural reasons. But we are basically happy to not do this, because our government is truly, and I'm not talking about any one party's government, Pakistani government, whether under martial law, whether under democracy, whether under presidential rule, prime minister's rule, has been a completely ineffective government. And probably Pakistan is one of the worst governed countries in the world. Bangladesh has left us far behind. India has left us behind. And we are not utilizing the resources, whether human resources or natural resources our country has. And unless those things change, we will continue to have this boom-bust cycles.
Thank you, Miftah Saab. I think this was a great start to the discussion. And I'm so glad that you mentioned that we have to incentivize exports and make exports easier. I was also listening to your talk at Habib University, and you were mentioning that the essential problem with Pakistan's economic model is that we try to do import substitution and not exports promotion. And I think that's essentially one of the flaws. And I think that is exactly where tech comes in. And I want to direct the conversation to Asif Peer Saab. Tech is the only sector in Pakistan which has trade surplus of 77%. And for our viewers, I would like to explain that it means that, compared to relatively to our tech imports, our tech exports are considerably high. So this tech is sort of one industry which has a great and thriving potential. And Asif Peer Saab, I want to take your opinion on it. And what are your comments? What benefits can technology industry provide to the economy if given the, if incentivized with the exports? Asif Saab, you are on mute, so you have to unmute yourself.
Sorry. So good evening and Assalamu alaikum, everyone. So thank you, Fahad and Park Launch for hosting us. And it's been great pleasure to be with Miftah Saab and Safia and you to answer these questions. So it's very important to understand, I think Miftah rightly said that export, right? That's what our priority is being. And services export is the backbone of manufacturing-led export. Used to be once upon a time, of course, everybody followed that, but now services export, and in services export, IT is the backbone. So I would like to just start with one comment, Of course, we are the 5th largest population, and you can see that our contribution to GDP to the world is 0.4% versus top 10 countries contribution is 60% to the world GDP. And IT sector, especially ICT for Pakistan, our contribution is about 1.2% of GDP is ICT sector versus like even I will not take an example of our neighboring country, just take as an example of Philippines. Their BPO industry is 9% of the GDP. Similarly, India is 8%, China is 7.5%, and US is, of course, way higher. So we are way below from our spending GDP perspective from IT standpoint. So IT exports, we are at the juncture, I would say, where we have everything that what we need. We have good HR available. We just need to groom and mentor and focus on building the HR capacity. Because if we build that HR capacity in our country, it will take us to the next level. And I'll just give an example, like you guys all know probably the number of, like you might have read the PSAB or Ministry of IT. They say that 600,000 IT professionals are available in Pakistan. So if you translate in our industry, if we are exporting the talent and services, I'm talking about services export, not the startups. And of course, that's a source of FDI. But for every $1 billion export, you need about 30 to 35,000 professionals, right? So just to take an example, if we really have 600,000 IT professionals, our exports need to be $18 billion, but we are not. We are 1/9 of what the number is. So what does it mean? We have the people, but we don't have the talented and skillful people. They are not relevant. They might be freelancers who are earning less than $5 an hour. But IT professionals, if you train them and mentor them and upskill and reskill them, it can change the game. Because they can earn, if they're earning $3 an hour, they can earn $6 an hour, and it doubles your export. So we have the capacity. We just need to have an approach, not just generalizing by saying that we have 600,000 IT professionals. We just have to find them and make sure that they are contributing to that export. I think that's a dilemma that we have. Similarly, you might have heard that we have every year 30,000 IT graduates, right? Only 5,000 to 10,000 IT graduates are employable by the industry. Remaining 30,000, 20,000, 25,000, nobody knows where they are. So again, if we upskill them, reskill them, train them, do something, and they can add $1 billion into our economy, right? So that kind of an approach, that what I think will improve the export because why people will come to Pakistan? Because of talent. And I think you might have read that World Economic Forum survey says that Pakistan is the most cost-effective IT outsourcing destination of the world. It's a World Economic Forum. Still, our cost is cheaper than all our neighboring countries. We are much cheaper because of dollar devaluation or whatever you say, but still we are cheaper from a skills perspective. We just need to create and develop those skills which we can sell. And I think the second thing I would like to add here is, of course, creating the economic narrative for Pakistan, that why Pakistan in IT. So positive branding, perception, development, and stating the fact why Pakistan will make a lot of difference, because we are not doing that much in that area as well. So I think if we do these things, I think I will add to the policy later, but I think if we do few things, I think IT export, I'm so much optimism, so much, because it really, even I don't feel proud that we are the largest IT company. We are very small in exports, right? We at an international scale, we are nothing. Nobody, right? If you compare global scale, we are nobody. In Pakistan, yes, you can say it, but because it's a huge potential and huge opportunity for our youth, and huge opportunity for us to create the by just doing these simple stuff. It is not a rocket science.
Thank you, Asif Saab. Like, I 100% agree with you on the skill development initiative. And one thought that I want to pick up on is just a comment on perception of Pakistan. And Safiya, I want to bring you in the discussion on this. Does political instability and economic crisis and just the subsequent policy inconsistency affect tech businesses in Pakistan? And, just looking through the lens of investments, Pakistan is sometimes profiled as a high-risk investment destination. And Asif Saab, I will also take your comment after Safiya on this, but generally just, first Safiya, you go ahead with, does it impact or does not impact at all? Is it even a factor?
Thank you, Kashun, and it's lovely to be with you all, Miftah Saab and Asif Saab. What a great panel. And I just have to say, Asif Saab Systems Limited is not a small thing, and what you've done is remarkable. And Miftah Saab, the sort of reforms that you undertook as finance minister were big steps, and so we have to commend you on those. So let me get to your question, Kashun. Our firm and what I've been doing for the last several years has been helping multinational companies, US companies, some of the largest tech companies expand overseas. And what I do is I help them think through the regulatory barriers and obstacles as they look to grow in Asia writ large. So Pakistan is one of those markets. India is one of those markets. Southeast Asia obviously is a huge market for tech and growth opportunities as well. So I can sort of speak comparatively on how companies view the opportunity landscape in Pakistan versus others. Yes, I would say, frankly, that the political instability is a factor in terms of investment, in terms of growth for US companies and for multinational companies who are looking at sort of where are the next, big opportunities. I think Pakistan definitely lands itself on that opportunity page for many of the companies, given the demographics, given the internet penetration, given the fact that you have so many young people, given the fact that it's unpenetrated, given all of these factors, I think it lands itself on as a sort of high up on the opportunities for many companies. But then what happens is the political instability, economic instability plays a factor in the risks that present itself. So I do have to say that is sort of a bigger picture there when it comes to challenges. The other thing is the policy and regulatory landscape, which we may get into later, but I would say PECA, social media rules, digital policies in Pakistan, which are inconsistent, I think really play a factor in US companies thinking through the risks involved with investing and growing in a market like Pakistan. And we can get into sort of the real policy issues that other countries have instituted to bring in tech investments, the type of incentives that Pakistan's neighbors and regional partners have sort of implemented to bring in special economic zones for tech, the sort of tax incentives for tech, tax incentives for data center growth, for 5G opportunities. I think there's real policy and regulatory options that the Pakistan government can undertake to really bring in those types of investments that you can just see that your neighbors have done, right? Like Startup India, Make in India, Invest India, all of these have real tax benefits, have real incentives attached to them that companies are looking to see and looking to grow with. So I do think that from a competitive landscape, Pakistan is very much an opportunity for companies, but obviously the political and economic instability plays a factor.
Thank you, Safiya. So many thoughts that I want to pick up on, but I'll let Asif Saab go first. Go ahead with the response.
Yeah, I think from a policy standpoint, I would say, like you mentioned many points, I think for digital Pakistan and digital initiative, digital infrastructure is very important. Like you just said, the 5G, we don't have 5G use cases, right? Because only 1% of population have 5G enabled phones right now. And with unless and until we have those digital infrastructure, like where now the telephones are text in a way that 5G phones are not available, right? So, how the telco sector will invest when you have 1% of the population have 5G enabled phones? Why would they spend billions of dollars? Even government do the auction, they will not, nobody will participate in that because it doesn't make business sense, because there are no use cases of the 5G. And from a digital infrastructure perspective, when we talk about digital Pakistan and all of this, you need digital infrastructure. Fiber optic adoption is less than 5%. Even 4G adoption is not there. So, and telcos, I think telco is the backbone for digital infrastructure, and their average revenue per user, ARPU, we are the lowest in the world, less than $1 per month, like 70 cents per month. So I think they're not investing in it. So when the telco and these broadband companies are not going to invest in internet, which we need, and the telecom infrastructure, how our digital Pakistan vision will survive, and how in today's world, you all know that post-COVID, remote work is the reality. So we need to have internet at least everywhere, because it's like electricity, right? So if we don't have that kind of a digital infrastructure, it won't work. So that's one. And from a policy standpoint, I think you touched upon the policy point. I think Miftah Saab knows very well, when he was finance minister, we had many interactions. I think we have never asked for at least, tax breaks and all of these things, what you mentioned. I think if you just keep aside one time, I think the foreign exchange regime is the most challenging right now. And I completely get it. We all completely get it, that it's difficult time and all these things are very important and critical. But I want to highlight, like you just said, I think 77%. I think I would say it's a 98%, right? Because it's software services. We only need laptops, right? We don't need anything right now. Even now we can work in cloud, and it doesn't require heavy infrastructure. So we bring 95 to 98% of dollars back as an IT services exporter. And if we can't take the dollar outside of Pakistan for a smaller companies, I would say smaller to medium-sized companies, if they don't invest in their own markets, right, they won't be able to grow. If you see a dream that I'm sitting in Pakistan and I'll be able to sell in America and it will work and the clients will come, it doesn't happen in reality. So you need to have that foreign exchange regime, which you are allowed to invest in your market, and then you bring back the money, because there is no other way. For larger companies like us, definitely, there is a requirement that we want to acquire the companies outside of Pakistan. So we bring those jobs to Pakistan. And if we can't allow that, what is happening? People are keeping their money outside of Pakistan, right? And now at individual level, that you are limited to take $30,000 or whatever. So in a year, so individuals are not bringing the money, companies are not bringing the money, because they think that once they bring the money, they can't take it out. So our exports are higher. Believe me, our numbers and exports are misleading, because export industry of IT is growing. We don't find people, good, talented people. It's not available. And the IT exports are soaring, but since the state bank counts the IT exports by remittance, there is a huge mismatch, because people are not bringing the money simply, right? Because they have an option to retain 100% of their export outside of Pakistan. They have an option. So why would they bring the dollars into country, right? Because we feel that they will never be allowed to grow. They will never be allowed to take the money. So this is a huge policy change, I think, Miftah Saab, and I've discussed with various finance ministers, and everybody understands it. Everybody gets it. And they said, yeah, you come to State Bank and we will allow it to you. But it's not about me. How the smaller, medium companies will have access to the State Bank, right? And opportunities in our field, you guys all know that it exists tomorrow. If you need to make a call for an investment decision, the company will not be remaining for 6 months for a State Bank to get an approval for an investment. It happens like this. And if you don't have that liquidity, you miss that opportunity. And I think that is the huge fundamental, if only one thing that government needs to do, only one thing, that flexible, get the flexibility of foreign exchange regime. I know it's challenging. Miftah is laughing. It's very difficult in these current circumstances, but it has not happened in the last 5-7 years when we didn't have that challenge. So we had the challenge now, but we didn't have the challenge 7 years ago when everybody taking the turf loans and they were importing the machineries for textile. They were importing tons of cars and everything, right? So current problem, yes, but it has never happened. So somebody has to fix that. Otherwise, IT industry will always struggle and you will not see the numbers because people are not sending the money.
Excellent. I think the conversation is picking up an exciting momentum, and I want to build on that. I want the panelists to sort of zoom out of Pakistan and look at the opportunity landscape, as Safia pointed out, which is, South Asia or the world at large. And, excellent points mentioned by Safia and Asif Pir Saab about, tax incentives, digital policies, the flexibility of taking money out or into Pakistan, just the forex retention. All of these are policy incentives, and the fact that we are having this conversation, in what is it, 2022, and countries like India and Malaysia have had these conversations in 1980s. I mean, when India sort of realized that there's an opportunity and demand for offshore digital services, they started introducing policy incentives and models like STZ, and then built over them over the years. And fast forward, they have now translated that opportunity and policy incentives into USD 180 billion export, right? And Safia, I want to turn the conversation towards you. You sort of guide business investors, and during the process of considering where the investments are channeled, what are the policy opportunities or policy considerations that the investors look for? And again, we're sort of looking through a larger lens and not just Pakistan, and this sort of also identifies that, again, investors do not only have Pakistan to invest in, right? And businesses and businessmen always see the right opportunity and they invest in the right market. So, over to you.
Thanks, Kashun. And let me just say, I totally agreed with Asif Saab's remarks on sort of the big challenges with the one-offs with the approvals with the state bank. So I'll leave that there for Miftah Saab to respond to. But I can talk about sort of the broader points here, Kashun, on what companies are looking for more broadly. First of all, there's a huge issue with repatriation of funds outside of Pakistan, right? I mean, U.S. companies, there's horror story upon horror story of cases of US companies who have invested in Pakistan, put money in Pakistan, the money is stuck. The money gets stuck in long legal processes, it gets stuck in, and they're unable to repatriate it or move the money, which is a huge issue for companies. Starting the finance process and starting the sort of, anyone who knows who's tried to open a bank account in Pakistan, at least, maybe 10 years ago, maybe this has changed. I hope it's changed. Knows the sort of difficulties in the process of doing that, right? Incorporation. So I've helped and thought through how the incorporation process here in the US, it happens overnight. It's all digital. You submit your documents online. The next day you're incorporated, you submit your articles of incorporation. That process has changed globally in Southeast Asia and in India and Bangladesh and other places where incorporation has become much easier. And I think that has to change in Pakistan, where you have to simplify the incorporation process for companies who are thinking of, let me partner with a Pakistani company, or let me set up US company incorporate in Pakistan. I think that process is lengthy, it's complicated, and getting approvals is a bureaucratic process that goes from one person to the next. It changes. One person says, yes, I can get this done for you, but it's not a systematic process, right? And then I talked about the tax exemptions and benefits. I'll give an example of a US company who got a tax exemption from one government to set up a factory, and then the government changed and the new government said, you need to reapply for that tax exemption with us. this is, I mean, for a US company who's who has invested, put a factory down, has property tax exemptions, and that was a major factor in putting that factory down. Now going back 3 years in and saying, now we have to go through that process again to get that approval is a huge obstacle. And for US companies who are hearing these horror stories in these sort of smaller circles in the US, in Washington, DC, that becomes a barrier. Those are barriers that I think if Pakistan is sort of systematizes these processes, which it can do, if it can systematize these processes for how these approvals are granted, and how these sort of tax exemptions, benefits, how the states, the provinces are granting these, and it sort of becomes uniform. I think you sort of lower the risk profile and you lower those barriers of entry for companies, because that's what we hear over and over again. I think one of the things that was on the radar for many US companies, at least in the e-commerce space, was FATF. And I think the fact that Pakistan is now removed from the FATF gray list is a huge barrier of concern that I was hearing from many US companies who were saying, well, we're thinking about it, but because Pakistan is on the FATF gray list, that's an issue for us. I think this is now an opportunity for US companies to say, look, now is this something that would be of interest to you, is to consider opportunities in Pakistan. But I do think that the sort of issues of manpower, women power, right? I think making sure that the economy is inclusive of the fact that you've got this huge population. How do you incorporate and upskill them is very important. 24/7. One of the things that I remember for a company who decided to put down a R&D facility in Bangalore is they put it in a special economic zone, but it was because they were granted 24/7 unrestricted access to power. They were given skilled a workforce, zero tax on import and export duties, and access to hundreds of engineering colleges within Bangalore. So just that sort of profile, like within one piece of paper, those bullets immediately were so sort of promising to investors that I think that's the kind of pitch and investment deck that Pakistan needs to come up with, and specifically to the tech industry. I think it can compete. I think it will compete. I think it's sort of we need to jumpstart it.
Thank you, Safia. I think we have sort of established a ground for the need of having repatriations, forex retention, and sort of the need to remove red tapes. Mr. Saab, I know that this is sort of a tough position that I've put you into, but do we have the space to introduce those policy changes? And I'm talking about the fiscal space, and also, like, in the larger terms, the regulatory space, vision, I would say.
Thank you, Kashmir. And I listened with interest to the two colleagues here, because obviously they're experts in their areas. But I disagree with a few of the things, if I may say that, and then I'll answer your question. That do we have the space? We can obviously create space. That's not a difficult thing. Look, we compared Pakistan to India just now, that India has $180 billion worth of exports, and we have maybe a couple of $1 billion. But India started working on their IT exports in the 1950s, when Pandit Nehru was building the Indian Institutes of Technology. When Asif Peer says there's a lot of talent in Pakistan, and he's right, but he also says that there's not so many employable people. The fact of the matter is that if you're competing, if a Pakistani software engineer has 6 months diploma from some private university in Karachi or Lahore, and he's competing with some guy who has a degree from IIT, it's not an even competition. And so we have to understand that the biggest reason Pakistan doesn't have the export of IT is that we don't have enough highly qualified engineers who can compete at the world level. That's the first thing. No amount of incentives I can give you can compensate for the fact that you don't really have the technical know-how in the manpower that you have. That is not to say that we don't have enough talent in Pakistan. Of course we do, but we're obviously not nurturing this talent and not educating our people. So that's the first thing. A second thing, I mean, to Safia's point, I mean, what she talked about, this policy changes, asking the company to go back. And this is one story that she's told. Every time I go to Washington and I meet with American Business Council, they tell 18 stories like this. And, this is not, so, I mean, so I'm not trying to absolve our policymakers from their sins, of inconsistency. I mean, I'll not do this. But I'll still tell you that, if it takes 8 days or 9 days to register a company in Pakistan, that's not why Pakistan is behind. The ease of doing business, we've done pretty well. Yes, to get a foreigner to become a director in a Pakistani company is one of the most difficult things you can do. It will take 6 months, and that really should be changed. And no doubt about this. But for instance, Pakistanis can open a Pakistani company. You don't even need a permit. I mean, you can start, a software house just like that. When I was there, I reduced the tax to 0.25% of the remittance. And the only reason I did 0.25% was to make sure that this is not Hawala only. This is actually official payment. Otherwise, 0.25%, I really didn't have to do it. You can't bring the tax any lower. But as I've talked to you, Kashmir, and I've talked to you privately, that sometimes the people who interact with the policymakers from the IT industries, they don't show enough maturity, to be very honest with you. They don't do enough homework, that what they need, just sometimes, they can be a little too political, or politically aligned with one political party, and they're not, being fair. But more than that, I can't bring the tax less than 0.25%, but for them to say that we're not even going to fill a form, that just makes no sense. What Asif says about, right now, Pakistani firm can retain 35% of its money abroad. So the State Bank tells me, Asif is saying, no, I'll take Asif's word for it. But the State Bank tells me that a Pakistani IT firm can keep 35% of its exports earning abroad. And I thought that was pretty generous. And I said that if you want to do more, then if you grow your exports by 10%, we'll let you do a little bit more. But that was 35%. I mean, if Asif is disagreeing, I'm sure he's more informed than I am. But that was my impression, that if you can keep 35%, I thought that was pretty reasonable. That you really don't need anything more than that. But so again, I come back to the first thing that Safia says, which was a perception, and not just perception, but the reality of law and order situation in Pakistan. 5-6 years ago, when I was a minister in 2007, I was 16, or 8 years ago, when I was investment minister, and we were talking about increasing exports. So I was assigned the task of talking to the IT people. What can I do to help? When I talked to these boys, some of these companies, small companies that were run by these kids in Islamabad, they said, our biggest problem is that we can't get visas to European countries or the North American countries. And so we can't go and sell our stuff. And that companies trust us to maybe design their websites, but they will not trust us to give their software engines. The bigger, more difficult part, will go to some other countries, even at a more expensive price. We have to address, and we've completely failed to address, but we have to address this perception of security in Pakistan, and we have to produce conditions so that Pakistani citizens, entrepreneurs can easily get visas abroad, and that foreigners don't feel threatened coming into Pakistan. We're a weird country in that sense that when I was growing up in 1970s, every single airline, European airline, almost used to come to Karachi. Now nothing comes to Karachi. Or one airline, British Airways, is the only European airline that comes to Islamabad and New Delhi. Airlines don't like to keep their crews overnight in Pakistan. We don't have foreign, businessmen and businesswomen who come to Pakistan very often. That's a serious problem with these IT people. So we have to change those things. Seriously, you can reduce the tax from 25%, 0.25% to zero. You can maybe allow them not 35%, but 45%. Nothing is going to change. Two things you need to do. You need to actually educate people in software engineering, IT and all that stuff. Not 6 months diploma. That's not a substitute for a real degree in 4 years with a lot of physics and a lot of engineering, and serious math, there is no substitute for that. And you have to really nurture talent. That's the first thing. And then you make it easy for foreigners to do business in Pakistan. Those two things you do, I think everything else will fall in place.
And Miftah Saab, let me just add that on the flip side, I have so many American companies who are waiting on visas, executives who are waiting on visas to come to Pakistan. And I just want to bang my head because I'm wondering why Pakistan wouldn't give some of the Fortune 500 companies visas to come to Pakistan to do business in Pakistan. So that it's an issue. You're absolutely right.
I mean,
Gigi
that is
Mifta Saab, go
I
ahead.
mean, I concede that. I mean that sometimes our policy, there are irrational consequences to our policies, adverse consequences to the policies we pursue. We really have to rethink some of those things.
Right.
I would agree with Mifta Saab over the need to bridge the skill gap resources. And again, I think the need and the direction right now is not what Pakistan offers in terms of the percentage of taxes, right? But what the competitive landscape offers and how Pakistan can sort of position itself and compete in the larger markets. And with that, I would like to hand over to Asif Saab, who was sort of disagreeing with the policy of with the implementation of 35% forest retention. And I sort of agree with him because the companies that I deal with, they also address their challenges of not having the luxury to implement that policy.
Thank you, Kushal. I agree with most of the points that Mifta Saab said. Only 2 points I would like to add upon, not disagreeing, but add upon for the clarification for everyone. Number one, you rightly said that I have never compared ourselves with India because it's not like fair comparison at all. Because as you rightly said, if people don't visit us and if the airlines are not coming, and we have sold abroad, and when we go to the bigger banks and financial institutions, ask for 1,000 people work or 100 people work, their risk department says we are in a red list or orange list or some sort of list they maintain because there's a risk. And even if they give you the work, they give you the chunk of work and diversify their risk and move the work to other countries. That's the biggest impediment to the growth. 100% agreed. How do we change that perception? We all have to work together, not just the government and diaspora, all of the expats. Everyone needs to play their part. Of course, government has a big role to play in all of these policies and economic narrative and branding and selling Pakistan and doing whatever it can be to G2G relationships, and we all have to do it. But the two things, Egypt is not like India, right? So Egypt's export of IT services is 2.5 times than us. Philippines is like 40 billion. Vietnam, all of these countries I compare, like if they can do it, right? Even Bangladesh was approaching us and in IT services, even like if the Sri Lanka had no default, it was half of us, right, in exports. Ukraine, right, Mifta, is even in this condition, I was shocked to read. I was thought that their software exports would wipe out with this crisis. A month or 2 months ago, I read the article, their IT exports are still greater than $4 billion. They were $5 billion prior to war, and they're still doing 4 billion, right? And they were targeting 8 billion if there was no war in like next year. So there is some comparison. So they are doing something right. Forget about India. And I'm coming to the foreign exchange now. What I think the misleading, which I think people don't understand, FCA rule is if I'm bringing the remittance to Pakistan, I'm allowed to retain 35% in my FCA account, foreign currency account, 35% in dollar basis, and my FCA account. It is allowed. And what I do with this FCA account, ideally, I should be able to use it, right? It is my FCA account, so it goes out from the State Bank Reserve in any case. So it's a zero-sum game for them. It's not in their reserve anymore. It's because it's a company's FCA account. But I cannot use it in today's world. That is a disconnect. I can use it as textile people can use it for marketing, for promotions, for setting up plants or doing something. In IT, we cannot do that kind of 35% of marketing and all of these things. Only 3 to 5% I can use it. Remaining 30% I want to use as an investment. And that is not allowed. If you read the foreign exchange manual, chapter 12, para 12.2, it says everything, but not an investment. I have shown that. I have shown to all the governors and deputy governors, just put a comma and put investment as a word. And they said, we cannot put investment because if we allow as an investment without central bank permissions and ECC permissions, it won't happen. So that is a dilemma. I need to invest in my market. I need investment to go out from my 35%, which I have retained. If I retain 35% in FC account and I can't use it, what's good for me? So they are telling you, right? But they are not allowing us, sir. That's my humble request. And it's a zero-sum game. It's a zero-sum game because it's not in their reserve. Just a comma investment. That's it. That's a simple change in FE manual, and it will solve the IT issues.
Okay, I stand corrected. I was not aware that they were not letting you invest. And by the way, I mean, the money that you keep, the 35% money that you keep in your account, that's also counted as part of the reserve. But, you know, by the way, total exports is 2 billion. You're talking about less than $200 million that will go out of
That's
investment. That's maximum. So, I mean, that's really, I mean, that's not a problem. And I mean, in any case, I mean, I'll submit your request to whoever I think is appropriate. But seriously, I mean, the problem with exports, Shun, and the problem with the IT industry, I honestly think, you know, and Asif talked about Philippines, Asif talked about Vietnam, he talked about Bangladesh, India, Egypt, and all these countries. They're not just ahead of us in IT, they're ahead of us in everything. You know, Vietnam had $1.2 billion of export when we had $12 billion. Sorry, $3 billion export when we had $2 billion of exports, $12 billion exports. When we had 12 billion, Vietnam had 3 billion. We are now at 31 billion. Vietnam is 160 or 170 billion total exports. Bangladesh, which has no cotton, exports more textiles than we do. They have exports of $40 billion. So those countries, you know, a friend of mine was telling the story that, you know, Bangladesh is, you know, if I've been there, Bangladesh a few times, every time you go there, there'll always be a political rally. I mean, seriously, there will always be political. They're very politically charged people. But two types of vehicles they would allow go through the processions and go through rallies. One is ambulance. If an ambulance, you know, you can hear an ambulance, people will move and make way. The other thing is export container. That people take export really seriously in Bangladesh. We don't take this seriously. And if, you know, so I mean, I think that, you know, we need to address the basics. We need to, you know, it is not done by making buildings and by making software technology zones and all that stuff. That's real estate game. You know, and Pakistan is obviously obsessed, policymakers are obsessed with real estate and construction. But the fact is software is exported when you actually train people. If you have good software engineers, I promise you things will happen. And nobody puts their life at risk to come and buy cheaper from Pakistan. And what Asif said about companies hedging their bets, if you give Pakistan some order, you will give somebody else an order. That's not just happening in software. That's happening in textiles. That's happening in every other company. I'll tell you a story. Recently, a team from Target, this American chain, that buys a lot of material from Pakistan and buys a lot more material from India. 17 people, Target buying team went to India, spent 7 days there. Then they went to Hong Kong from there. And then they had all the Pakistani exporters on a Zoom meeting for 40 minutes. So we got 40 minutes. Those guys got 7 days. You know, they were able to dine them, find them, and take them to the factories and offices and all that stuff. And we just had 40 minutes on Zoom. And the only reason, you know, Target people didn't come was because of whatever, you know, risk insurance. Maybe the company didn't have risk insurance, or maybe the flights were more difficult, or whatever. I mean, you know, and the perception is really bad also. I mean, the perception is horrible. My daughter is getting married recently in a short time, and some of her friends are coming from America where she went to college. And the sort of questions that they are asking before coming, that, you know, will we be allowed to wear this? Will we be allowed to wear this? I mean, you know, I mean, they're thinking, I don't know where they're going, you know, that my daughter keeps assuring them that this is a very nice country to visit. And once people come here, they feel very safe. But the perception is really horrible. And in all honesty, the reality is not perfect either.
I would just add that the insurance issue is a big one, right? Because companies are required to get what's called MEGA insurance, and it is off-putting. Even if you get the insurance, it's off-putting because in your mind you're thinking there's a significant risk here that I'm having to ensure the life and the business of my employees and the staff before I enter this country. So that is a big issue, the insurance. And the perception is real. Miftah Saab, you mentioned some of the barriers. One of the other things that I mentioned that I think should be mentioned is IP protection, right? Before the IP protection is a huge issue everywhere. It's an issue in India. It's an issue all over Southeast Asia as well, right? I mean, pharma companies have huge issues of sort of their R&D. This is their lifeblood being protected. And I think one of the things that they talk about is stronger IP protections writ large in South Asia, Southeast Asia. And so I think for tech companies, I know this is an issue that comes up frequently, in addition to all of the issues that we've raised here.
I would take my cue here. Just to mention what Miftah Saab was talking about, the perception. I think while that is an important issue for Pakistan, the security perceptions I'm talking about, but a good validation, this perception seems to be evaporating at the moment. And a good validation of it is that last year when Taliban took power in Afghanistan, there were a lot of conversations about what repercussions would that have on Pakistan's tech industry. But, we saw more VC funding announced in Pakistan in just 4 weeks than we had seen in the last 4 years. So I think it's just the market size, the talent that seems to be attracting investors into Pakistan, and we need to put in just put in the right boxes in the right place. And coming back to the policy incentives, which again, I'll also be mindful of the time here. Asif Saab, you want to add something? Please go ahead. I would ask the panel to drop in last comments, and then we'll move to questions from the audience.
I want to add one thing. I think we always misconceived. I think you just mentioned why the money came in. I think central bank, state bank played a vital role in reviving this startup sector. I think you guys don't believe what they have done. Like they have allowed mirroring of the companies outside of Pakistan for the foreign VCs to set it up. So any company set up in Pakistan, you can mirror in anywhere in Netherlands or wherever you like. And this mirroring helped VCs to have a confidence. And I think we should give a full credit where the central bank has done this great work. And also they've allowed certain things like allowing 10% without asking their permission, average of 3 years as $1. So I think there are a few good things happened as well. So while we are always say that, and that's why I've never mentioned, Miftah can recall, I've never mentioned the tax issues or 0.25. We've never, because these are immaterial. I think we really need to, if we really need to do things and we can compete. I think Miftah, so just I want to add now, the world has changed. That's what I was trying to say. If our freelancers are just doing the content writing, we can upskill and reskill them through 6 months or a year diploma, because technology has changed, like through low code, no code. It's if you have a critical thinking and analytical capabilities, still you can learn. You might not be able to learn to earn $20, $30 an hour, but you still can earn $10, $12, $8 to $12 an hour versus $3 an hour or $4 an hour. So we have to look at the data. We just have to do a scientific way of doing things, not just guessing and just saying, I think this is where we lack as a government, as an industry as well, to be honest. But we don't have the good data. Unless and until you don't have the good data, that where these 20,000 extra graduate, they are not employable, how can we make them through university intervention, through curriculum intervention, so they come like good? They are teaching calculus to them. They are 4-year degree program, right, in computer science. So why they are not employable? Somebody needs to address the grassroots, right? If you address it, the root cause, then these people will be employable. And if these people will be employable, then of course, as Miftah Saab just said, that then there's a job and there is an export. Similarly, so we really need to stop generalizing as an industry and as an ministry or as a public government and focus on the data and really focus and take the corrective actions wherever we can to exploit what we have. Even if we have, as I said, I keep repeating myself, 600,000 IT professionals. I'm not saying that. It's PSAB, it's IT ministry, everywhere it is listed. But where are those 600,000 IT professionals? Can anybody find them? Nobody. Even you can't find 100,000 professionals, right? Forget about 600,000. So how can you target those and upskill and reskill? And rest, I think we just need to do hard work, but through the data. Now you can't have generalized step. Otherwise, you will always behind.
Excellent point. I 100% agree with Asif Saab on the need to have data in order to identify and sort of realize the opportunities again, right? And curriculum revision is sort of one of the first steps in order to transform those semi-skilled resources into skilled and talented resources and put them out to the world to sort of, gain and utilize those opportunities ahead. I think this conversation is sort of a unique intersection between tech and policy. So before we move forward to the questions from the audience, I'll first let the panel sort of exchange questions with each other, if there are any, which is a good opportunity to do so. So Asif Saab, if you have any questions from Miftah Saab or Safia, or Miftah Saab, if you want to, divert some questions towards the panel.
I have no questions.
No, I think I have already said, and I think to understand my point as well, why I'm saying the foreign exchange regime needs to be flexible. Other than that, I've never asked any point. I think he knows very well whenever there is an interaction, because I feel there is a real pain in that, and it can really help the country. It's not about us. I think we can figure out a large company can do something, but for a smaller player, for a smaller industry, and bringing the dollars back to Pakistan is really important. And this is the deep purpose, that how can we make our country stronger by creating jobs, by training people, by upskilling and bringing the dollars to country, which is the mostly needed right now. So my humble request again to Miftah Saab, and he can still talk to State Bank and figure out what can be done. If I'm wrong, or we can make it something amicable to the industry, it will really help. This is my humble request. It will really help. I think rest of the issues, I'm not even, we all know that we can't change the perception overnight. We can't build the universities overnight. We have to work towards it. We have to give confidence. We have to build the economic narrative. We have to have everything, but it will take time. And he's rightly said that it's happening for all the exports. That's why we are not able to export more because of all of these challenges in all the sector. But IT is the low-hanging fruit. If we can just exploit what we have, I think it's a great opportunity for the country. It might take few years, but that's okay. You have to start from somewhere, right? And excel. But we need to have an exponential growth. We can't grow by 20-30%. If you keep growing by 20-30%, we are irrelevant. We are irrelevant. In IT industry, if you are growing by 20-30% a year, you are irrelevant. You are nobody. Because scale makes you bigger and better. There is no question about it.
Safia, would you like to add something?
I think we've covered a lot. I feel Miftah Saab's pain as someone who's former government and oftentimes gets looped back into these things. But I do think that, tech is the low-hanging fruit, and I think it's really, the way of the future. Every company is a tech company now, right? And so I think that's the way US companies think of themselves. And there's the startup ecosystem in Pakistan is really promising given COVID's dynamics, right? I mean, I think everything was sort of thrust into sort of in the virtual space, and so much it was pushed into e-commerce, and I think that's been a good development for Pakistan. So I think some of the regulatory and policy changes that we discussed today, I think if we can push forward on those, I think we'll see some real momentum.
Great, and no intentions to put Miftah Saab on the spot here, but if anything, it speaks of his intellectual demeanor to engage in meaningful conversations. There's this one question from the audience which I want to put forward, and I think I'll direct this to Asif Peer Saab. The question is that there are a lot of remittances hurdles. How can State Bank of Pakistan make it easier for startups to escape those challenges?
I think this is the remittance is a remittance for the startup. I think remittance coming in should not be a challenge, right? So that's no brainer. If you're bringing the dollars into country, I don't see that people have those kind of issues. And if you are aware, if you are a startup, as I said, State Bank has made life easier by allowing you to set up a mirror company abroad, and then you can raise an investment, and then you can remit easily. It's very easy. You can read the laws that State Bank came out last, I think it's an year and a half ago. So please follow that. Getting remittance and setting up the startup and getting the VC money and everything is now much simpler and much easier. And that's why we have seen the influx of remittances and investment coming in. So that's a great step that State Bank has done. If you're talking about, of course, anything we already addressed, like taking the money out as a challenge for and government is very focused with central bank to set up that the foreign exchange accounts and so on and so forth, so they can, instead of getting the money through Payoneer or some other media, they can get the money into their bank account. I think now the banks are very open. We have done multiple sessions with the freelancers community and the startups. So I don't see that, but if there is any specific issue, of course, we can discuss offline, and we can bring to the government discussion if there is anything tangible. I think there are many, I think they're very receptive. I think for IT industry, I can tell one thing, that all these governments, I'm apolitical from that perspective. Everybody understand this and everybody is supportive. It's all about execution at the end, right? So.
Perfect. There's another question from the audience, which I will direct to you, Safia, because I know we have had private conversations on this. The question says there is no national policy on data governance. Isn't that fundamental?
Well, yes, their data policy is absolutely necessary. And I think there is movements in Pakistan around a data governance bill. The issues is a lot of it requires data localization. A lot of it requires strict content requirements. It allows for government access to use personal data and access to personal data. Obviously, these are contradictory to guidelines within a lot of companies on sort of their own platforms, right? So this is a major concern for US companies who are thinking about entering Pakistan, putting down roots in Pakistan, doing more business in Pakistan is really where that bill goes. And I think data governance bills are necessary. It's necessary to regulate the industry. Regulation is key, but I also think it's important to make sure that you're doing it in a way that makes sense to the users, and makes sense to content, for how it's used. And I think a lot of times we're seeing their pushback on content for political speech or for content that is, what Pakistan considers immoral or blasphemous. And I think that contradicts, for example, the platform requirements for a lot of international companies. And so they're oftentimes confused with how do they operate in a landscape like this. And so I think those are issues that are still to be ironed out. And I think Pakistan is doing the right thing in sort of putting forward a bill. I think it matters what that bill looks like at the end of the day and how international and US companies can operate within those guidelines.
Thank you, Safia. Although we have an overwhelming number of questions for us, but we are way past our time. And I know, Safia, you have to drop off. So I will ask Miftah Saab for his closing comments, and then we'll drop off.
Well, thank you very much for having me on this program. Obviously not a Doom IT expert or even close to that. But the best thing about this is that when you sit with experts, you learn something. So, I learned something. So thank you for giving me an opportunity to sit here and talk to us.
Thank you, Miftah Saab. Asif Saab, if you want to, have any intervention or.
Would like to just thank you and forum and Miftah Saab for always listening and always helping the industry. He always is very welcoming and do his best to contribute and to help us. Thank you, and thank you everyone. And I think our job is to raise the point and to make Pakistan better. We are very passionate about it. We all are, and we really want to make a difference. And we want to see Pakistan a flag top everywhere, even though it's a software or any industry. Inshallah, we will, and we will see the exports grow as well, and our problems go away. So I'm very optimistic. There's a lot of opportunity for anyone listening. Please. This is a great opportunity, great times. Pakistan is at the point where IT sector and IT services or IT innovation, startup, entrepreneurship, whatever you want to do, this is the time. So don't miss that opportunity. Whatever state political or economic stability will come, but this sector is humongous opportunity because there's a scarcity of good resources, talent, and Pakistan, if Pakistan can keep producing that, nobody can stop us from growing that, right? Growing our IT. So let's focus on what we can do and just stay positive, and inshallah things will happen.
Thank you, Asif Saab. You've said everything I planned on saying to close this discussion. So thank you, Miftah Saab, Safia, Asif Saab, for taking out time for this conversation. Again, the goal is to see Pakistan at the top through any sector. I think IT is a promising sector, so why not enable it and see Pakistan at the top? But thank you to the listeners for taking out time. And with this, I think we should, move out. And thank you to PakLaunch for giving us the platform and Ali Bhai for enabling this conversation.
Thank you.
Okay, ji. So, Allah Hafiz.
Thank you.